Join Director Doug as he spans the globe by sea, by land, and air to bring you the best of Figures in Action! Director Doug here, and welcome to another exciting performance of Figures in Action, brought to you by cinemacircus.net. And we have an outstanding show for you, a very unique one that's of historical magnificence, if you will. I have with me Mr.
Christopher Crouch.
Christopher Crouch.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this. And let me say something, perhaps an official statement. We always refer to him as the Doctor, as opposed to Doctor Who. Mm-hmm. And that is something I think a lot of people don't necessarily realise, because they know the TV series is Doctor Who. We talk about the actors who've played Doctor Who for a number of years. It's almost ancient history now, so I feel a bit of a time traveller myself. But back in the 70s and early 80s, I was involved with what at one stage was called the exploitation of the series, but it became the merchandising, and it's all about the spin-offs from the programme. And colleagues and I would be licensing toy companies, clothing companies, people who made the dolls, even my own personal TARDIS that you see here. It wasn't quite big enough to bring me here today, unfortunately, but it does remain as an example of one of the items that I licensed. It is clearly for TARDIS, and I suspect most people knowing that the TARDIS is much more than just what used to be the Metropolitan Police phone box. Very common in its day on the streets of London, but that actually is why it was picked as the TARDIS, so that the Doctor could materialise on a street corner in Britain in the 20th century and not be thought out of place. Nowadays, if he were to do that, everybody would say, what the heck is that? But there we are, that's my own one. Little bit small for me, but it is a cookie jar, and that's what it really was.
So that was the early days and started with that, and I know that you have a lot of anecdotes and stories, because the value of this is not what you can read, but what the only way that we would ever hear about really what went on is from you, because you were there. Tom Baker, I mean, I'm just astounded here to be with you and to find out the information that most people would never be able to hear about. Well, you are our virtual TARDIS, and you are taking us back in time. Having someone take us back and to relive those moments is iconic. So we're here to just absolutely absorb everything you want to tell us.
Well, that's a very interesting point, so talking about the moment, and that's a good lead-in, because the moment it was first aired in Britain was literally a day after the assassination of John Kennedy.
And not know that.
That was, I better give the exact date, it was shown 23rd of November 1963.
1963, wow.
And even in those far off days, the BBC liked to be precise on cue, we're now filming, or we're now showing it live, as TV was in those days. But it had to be postponed by about 90 seconds, because BBC News was still giving coverage a day later of the assassination and the aftermath of that, as one would rightly expect when the President of America has been assassinated. And they were worried a week later, when the second episode of Doctor Who was to be screened, that many people hadn't seen the first one, so they cut out the programme they were showing beforehand to re-show the first episode and then go live to the second episode. So that was 1963. I was actually sitting there watching it at home. I was a a new member of the BBC. I had literally joined the BBC myself a couple of months earlier in September of 1963, which in my time was BBC Enterprises, which had been set up specifically to look at exploiting the rights of all television and radio programs if there was something that could be done with it. Maybe publishing T-shirts, toys, selling the program overseas, a whole variety of different things. And of course, after a period of time, the BBC managed to find a number of countries, mainly ones who spoke English, of course, who were interested in taking Doctor Who. I think the first one was actually a station in Canada, and then a few of the PBS stations started to purchase the right to screen the series. But it was rather bitty, the station there, another one sort of up north, one over on the east coast. It was never coverage. It was what I think you guys call syndication.
Tom Baker, I mean, I'm just astounded here to be with you and to find out the information that most people would never be able to hear about.
Well, I certainly had a lot of admiration for Tom. He was an actor known from film, from television already. The Doctor as a character has, of course, not only morphed in his physical appearance, as I think many people viewing will realise from having watched the series, which was a great attribute for any sort of series if it was to have a long life, because no actor really wants to be typecast and remain in a role forever. So if the actor got bored or passed away or any other reason one might think of, all they had to do was to do a little sort of animated scene where the Doctor was changing his appearance and he morphs into the new person in that role. So Tom was actually the fourth. The first one, who was the original Doctor, the actor William Hartnell, who played that, had made quite a career in British television playing regimental sergeant majors and people who were rather austere and perhaps didn't suffer fools gladly, and that was his Doctor. And he changed into Patrick Troughton, who was another well-known character actor in movies, British movies and television. And his Doctor was a little more of an inventor, slightly more sort of off the cuff, perhaps a little more odd, certainly perhaps a little less human, because after all, the Doctor is a Time Lord. He comes from Gallifrey. He's not of this world, guys, which is why he can turn up in his TARDIS. But it helps, if he's landing on Earth, to actually look like the Doctor. Now, the script has changed sometimes, that he hasn't been able to leave Earth when it suited the script writers and various other things, and I think for our own purposes that it's probably quite good that he remains as a human being in appearance. But of course, to leap right up to the 2018s, for the very first time you'll be aware that the Doctor has been briefly seen and will be seen in the next screening of the new series as a lady. Now, that makes her a Time Lady. And some people have said, oh, the very first Time Lady. Now, of course, we have seen others, because the companion, Romana, was a Time Lady, played by two different actresses, because, of course, she could rejuvenate, reincarnate, metamorphized into a different being, all very convenient. But yes, I met Patrick Troughton. I didn't meet Hartnell because he sadly had died. The next one was John Pertwee, who was rather a dignified, slightly dandyish looking person, and all his stories were set on Earth because something went wrong with the mechanism and he was here. He couldn't escape. So I certainly met him, and then he wanted to move on to do other things. He had a varied career, and he certainly hoped it would continue to be varied. And in came Tom. And certainly Tom, I think a lot of people recognised him. They knew who he was for his previous work. I certainly felt that he was going to bring an interesting characterization, because one of the things he'd best been known as was playing Rasputin in the big movie Nicholas and Alexander, which had been, I'm sure, here as well as all over the rest of the world, big movie, and there he was as Rasputin. So if you played Rasputin, I guess there's a bit of a clue as to how you might look at playing the Doctor. Not murderous or evil or anything like that, but certainly a much larger than life character. So that was Tom. Great guy. And he is immediately doing well on the series, getting better ratings. The ratings are really going up, and America is taking note. Now, we had an agent. BBC Enterprises had Time Life as their agents, and around that time a group of people had left Time Life, a number of executives, and set up their own company, Lionheart Television. So I was beginning to liaise with them and coming over, and they were finding that they were able to sell the series much better. And so most people who were now beginning to watch it in America were seeing Tom was their first Doctor Who.
Okay.
There'd never been many people who had access to those earlier ones before, but now they were seeing Tom. And fan clubs were being set up.
Now, what year was that now?
Well, that would be about 1976, 77.
Mm-hmm.
All that activity happening. We had an agent who represented BBC Enterprises for licensing of spin-offs. And in their wisdom, the top people in BBC Enterprises said, we don't really want him. And we were actually contacted by one of the people behind the first of the fan clubs over here, a lady called Barbara Elder. And she said, you should be out there doing this merchandising, getting T-shirts and dolls and everything. And we said, well, yes, we know about that, but we've just fired our agent. She said, well, I could do it. And she had a guy who had been with CBS Records, who knew a lot of stuff, worked with her. And so we said, yeah. So for a few years, she was not only involved in the fan side, but starting to do the licensing. But of course, if she was doing the licensing, she had to come sometimes to meet with me in Britain, and sometimes I was coming over to meet with her here.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first times was at a toy fair in New York, the big American toy fair. I think it's still held at the Javits Center each year now in February, January or February in New York. So we met there. And another guy who was running a fan club or getting involved in it had been in touch with her and said, oh, I've got a couple of people who want to talk about a license. I'm their lawyer. So we sort of met up, and he was a very bright young man, nice guy, Norman Rubinstein. The couple we brought along, we didn't think that they were quite right to be a licensee. More of these people in a moment. But before they're reintroduced into the story, I'm coming over to meet with another Doctor Who fan club, this one based in Colorado. And had a meeting straight off the plane, into a meeting at about 8 o'clock. About 9:30 that was over, so I left. And the guy who was driving me, connected with that club, said, I think we might need just to go back to their office. I said, oh, why's that? He said, well, I don't actually trust the guy. You've loaned him a whole lot of videos of Doctor Who episodes, as they're an official club, officially recognised by the BBC. He said, I think he might be copying them. So back we went, he was copying them.
Oh boy.
So he wasn't fired because he hadn't been able to exploit them, but he was read the Riot Act. So perhaps he figured if he was copying them himself, it was all right. No. So that was nipped in the bud. But at that stage I tended to be going to conventions, because he had got a convention there and that was the next day.
What were they like?
These were fairly small events. There was another one down at Fort Lauderdale. We would have one or two British licensees who were prepared to travel, and one who was an agent for W.H. Allen, who a kind of distributor, and he had all the Doctor Who books. So they would be selling merchandise. But they were a good advertisement for the series, and they got the fans in. And people who wanted a license knew they could come along and they'd be able to meet somebody from the BBC who would be able to talk to them and decide whether a license was relevant or not. So it was good. I would say the one in Colorado had about 400 or 500. It's fairly modest stuff, and it hadn't been on TV for that long. The one in Fort Lauderdale had circa 1,000. There was, that was for the first time that I was meeting die-hard fans of science fiction, shall we say. They happened to like Doctor Who, so that's why they came along. But there was one guy who was dressed up as Dracula. And he had got the cape and the fangs and everything, and going around the whole time. And yet he'd be trying to have a conversation with me quite reasonably, and saying, and I said, well, what do you do for a living? Are you an actor? Oh no, I'm a submariner with the US Navy. So I hope he didn't go around the submarine, rather close quarters, I'm sure, in all his gear. But, that for me was an insight into the fan clubs over here. I'd been to the British one, but there was only for one, Doctor Who Appreciation Society in Britain, and they probably never attracted more than about 300 or 400 people, even though millions watched the programme. But that's because we're not so much into fan clubs. We don't do fan clubs in a big way in Britain. Probably there's more now these days than there was in those, but remember that's sort of about the mid-70s. I got to know the chairman of that, Mark Sinclair, very well. He was a good friend, and one of the things he told me was, there's a cottage industry building up here. And I found it was the same in Britain. Now, if that's a term you're not familiar with, let me explain. I mean, we all know what an industry is, and I was looking to license major players. Milton Bradley's, Kenners, people like that in the toy trade, and some big names in clothing. That wasn't as easy as it might have sounded, but nevertheless, that's what my job was to do, and back in Britain as well. But a cottage industry is where somebody starts making something at home. And there were fans, both in Britain and here, who thought, oh, yes, I love Doctor Who. I'll start making a little miniature TARDIS, or I'll start doing paintings of the Doctors and then get them turned into prints and start selling those at the conventions. So Mark said, I think you better know about that and you better have a look at it and decide whether A, it can be legally agreed, or whether in fact you're actually going to give them the full thing and give them a contract. And of course the bottom line on that was, is it actually presentable enough? Because whilst it wasn't going to make thousands of pounds, there might be some things there which might make a few hundred in terms of royalties, because that's how we worked.
Right.
You know, we come back to this cookie jar over here. The guy would get a license for that, and he'd have to pay a royalty on it, which might be 6 or 7 in those days, would probably be about 10 to 12% of the money he sold it for, not necessarily a retail price. But then, of course, the fans who were doing things, there was only a retail price for them, because they'd take their 20 they'd made and go along to the nearest convention.
Yeah, well, sure.
And some of the things were pretty dreadful. You know, you couldn't allow it. But some of the other things weren't bad. I'll come on to the other convention, the much bigger one which I'd mentioned. Barbara Elder, first of all, did one in Palo Alto, and she had teamed up with some other people in the science fiction business, so there were other elements of science fiction, but that was all the written word. They were famous sci-fi, American sci-fi authors and authoresses. The end of the previous year, they'd had to stop filming the series in Britain because some of the technicians or something had gone on strike.
Right.
It was in the middle of a series called Sharda, which never got screened because it was never even finished. But it was always part of a mythology that sitting out there is unfilmed material, real filmed material and unfilmed scripts. And I understand that about a year ago somebody actually filmed those bits of Sharda which hadn't been filmed, and they are making it available. But it wasn't. Screening had to be stopped, filming had to be stopped, everything to do with it had to be stopped. So somebody who was doing another science fiction convention wasn't really focusing on Doctor Who, but because Tom was available, word had got around, so he said, oh, you couldn't send that Tom Baker character over, could you? He had recently got married to the Honourable Lala Ward, who was playing Romana, the second
companion.
She was the second. No, she wasn't the second companion. She was probably about the 30th companion. She was the second time lady. Because we had Mary Tam had played the role, then we had Lala Ward in it. And they had married. So, and about that time, so I can just hear Tom saying, oh, come on, darling, this will be a fun thing to do. Let's go over there and we'll make it part of our honeymoon. And he did. And he thoroughly enjoyed himself, and allegedly so did she. They had a good time. When this other thing was mooted, Tom go to, the convention at Palo Alto, which was increasingly focusing on him and Doctor Who to the expense of these other poor authors and authoresses who were each allowed to do a little question and answer time, but not too much. Tom was suddenly the big name, and people were contacting from all around. Colleen, who I see's heard enough.
Your wife is Colleen.
Yes, let me explain that. My wife-to-be did some voluntary work. She also had been in the US Navy, actually, but she was as a medic. She was with the Veterans Administration Hospital here in Fresno at the time, and she did a little bit of voluntary work for the local PBS station, and through that she heard, because they were showing Doctor Who by then, and she was part of the audience, and they had announced that over in Palo Alto there was going to be a Doctor Who convention with no less than Doctor Who himself appearing. They all said Doctor Who, regardless of it only being the Doctor, because everybody thinks he is Doctor Who. So she said, oh goody, took herself over there, got involved. I always remember after coming back from the event, Tom and I were having lunch one day. He said, oh, by the way, he said, did you ever meet that Colleen Grady? I said, well, yes, I did, actually. The day afterwards, I was being interviewed by the San Jose PBS station, who were covering the event, and she was standing listening to that and came over and said, hello, I'm who I am. I just want to say thank you very much for coming. Oh, he said, oh, good, good. He said, do you remember when we had that awful meal? I don't know why, but so many, whether they're hotels, as that was the Hyatt Hotel, had been opened and used to belong to Doris Day. Doesn't even exist these days, long since pulled down, but it was a lovely hotel. And they had a great restaurant, except that the meal they put on, because, you know, conventions always have to have a dinner or a lunch, don't they? It wasn't too impressive. I'd got 2 or 3 of the writers around me, so I knew they were all grumbling. And Tom wasn't impressed, but he was down in the well of this great cavernous dining area, and there were various tables with people who had managed to get invited in, and Colleen had got invited onto one of the tables, and Tom was sitting at another, and he got fed up with the meal, so he moved his chair out so he could talk to the next table, and Colleen picked up her chair and came round and sat down next to him, and he said, oh, he said, aren't you eating your food? And she said, I'm not here for the food. And she always spoke like that. But I don't think anybody had the food. It was pretty grim.
So she met him and got to know him.
She met him, and I've got the photos to prove of that, which we might work in a bit later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, she met him. I mentioned that the poor writers didn't get too many people in their question and answers. But said Barbara Elder said, well, as you are coming, she said, you can do one of the question and answers. I'm sure the people are all interested to hear about this licensing you do and sort of things you license onto. So I said, oh, all right. She said, Tom will be outside if anybody wants to sign his, get him to sign their autograph book or sign their program or whatever. And we booked this room for you. So I thought, oh yeah, nice big room. That's good. 6 people turned up.
6? Where was everybody else?
Well, there were a few hundred. In fact, I think there were supposed to be 900 to about 1,000 at this one. They were all lined up around the swimming pool, around different parts of the building, all waiting to shake Tom's hand, give him a big kiss, and those who had a pen and something to write on, an autograph.
Autograph. Boy, those are the days, huh? Did you mention one time he got kidnapped?
Ah, well, that's another story, and it's not even Tom.
No.
Just a brief thing about Colleen, because Colleen, of course, is the reason that I'm here today. She wrote to me afterwards, again to say thank you, and there'd been another convention which I wasn't able to go to at St. Louis, or St. Louis, as I think some people pronounce it. And she and 3 or 4 of the other young ladies had all gone off to that, and there'd been a guy from the Sunday Times there, and he was covering it, and Tom was there again, and I think John Pertwee might have been at that one, I'm not sure. and he did a piece, and she said, it's the Sunday Times, which is a British newspaper, and it's the colour supplement, and if you were able to get hold of a copy of it, that would be terrific. Only trouble was, she couldn't remember my name. She certainly didn't know my address at the BBC. So she sent her letter in an envelope, which of course, like all Americans are required to do, had put her name and address on the envelope. And she'd addressed it to the guy from the BBC who attended the Doctor Who convention in Palo Alto, California. And it found me. It probably took about 2 weeks around the BBC, but it found me. But I didn't just sign Colleen, but I didn't have her address. As you see in Britain, people don't put addresses on the envelopes. They always put their name and address on the top of a paper, even if it's a personal letter. And Tom remembered Colleen Grady as she was then, but not where she lived or anything. But there was another convention coming up, a big one in Chicago. And this was organised by Norman Rubinstein, who I mentioned earlier, who was this young lawyer who was representing the people who were trying to get a licence from me at the New York Toy Fair the year before. And Norman had quite a lot of ambition in many respects, but he was a very astute person. He was a lawyer, as I say, but he decided he was putting on a convention, but no half measures. He hired the Hyatt Regency. He got virtually all the living doctors at that time over, the producer, about 5 or 6 of the companions, who are either the current companions or the earlier ones, and various other people, the guy who was the voice of K9, the robot dog, all these people. I mean, I hate to think how much he paid the talent to come over, even if he only paid expenses for them. He clearly was a very rich young man.
And he was changing the scene of the conventions and possibly the attendees or the numbers of them then.
He was certainly lifting the bar, raising the bar. No question of that. That had multiple thousands. I don't know, I've heard different stories. But Colleen and her friends were there again, and I ran into them, and I'd got the article just in case I'd seen her there. So from then on, we both know who we were and how we could be contacted and stuff like that. So that was good. But the convention was hard work because there was just so much happening there. And then I got a message from one of Barbara Elder's people who said, John Pertwee and Elizabeth Sladen have been kidnapped.
Kidnapped? Who was that now again?
Well, that's John Pertwee, who was the previous Doctor before Tom. And by this time, Tom was no longer the actor. Peter Davidson was in the role, and he was there as well. But people by then were getting to know the earlier Doctors, and Patrick Troughton had been at the convention, and Elizabeth Sladen, who I think is the best, sadly deceased now, but she was the best, and certainly I think the most popular of all the companions. She actually started as a companion with John Pertwee's Doctor, so that's why she happened to be with him at this time, when they allegedly were kidnapped. I'll explain that in a moment. And then she lasted over into Tom's time. And for those people who know the history of Doctor Who, they'll know that she's had 2 spin-offs from it. The first one was K9 and Company, was just adventures of Sarah Jane Smith, who was her character, and K9. And then she came back into it because the Doctor in a much more recent version of him manages to land his TARDIS where she lived. So now we've got a much older Sarah Jane Smith, and everybody was so delighted to see her back in it again. She got her own spin-off series, which she'd probably still be doing now if she hadn't died, because that became very popular. It was targeted at a younger market than regular Doctor Who, and Doctor Who itself had always been decided to be family television, and it was shown at about 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening. For most of its life in the early days. So it was family television, so the youngsters would be watching it, they wouldn't have gone to bed, but it was anticipated that it would have an adult audience. But I think the audience has got much more adult over the years and appeals to adults probably more than it does to children these days. It's where it's a bit more sophisticated, where it's a bit more technical, I don't know, and that doesn't matter. But I got this message, so I thought, oh, flip, what am I going to do about this? Because I'm the man from the BBC. The producer was there, but he was considered part of the talent, so he's being interviewed, he's up on the stage.
So you got a message.
I got a message from one of Barbara Elder's people, who fortunately he and his wife lived in Chicago, and that's where this is. It's the Hyatt Regency Hotel, big, modern, it hadn't been opened many years, out at the airport, huge hotel. But this lad said, and I know where they are, because I've heard who's done it.
So he's missing, you get a message, says, I know where they are.
The guy who comes.
And you get this message.
Yes, from him. So I said, well, I don't know where they are. He said, don't worry, I'll take you there. He said, because I know exactly where they are. So he drives me out to this place. It's a shop, double-fronted store. It's quite a reasonable size, but it's just on the one level. It's got 2 big bay windows full of merchandise. The first window is all Doctor Who merchandise, some of it which has come in from Britain, which shouldn't really, but that doesn't matter, it's legitimate. Quite a lot of it I don't recognise at all, so therefore it isn't. The other window is all the Virgin Mary. Statues of the Virgin Mary and books about the Virgin Mary and anything you care to associate with the Virgin Mary. I thought, this is unreal, but, yes, I'm in Chicago. So in we go. The couple who owned the store were the couple who had tried to get the license from me. And they weren't obviously going to be put off by the, no thank you, lovely to have met you, but no, unfortunately we're not going to be able to license you. Norman Rubinstein had already told me that he was no longer involved with them, because I'd actually, when he had first said, look, I'm doing this convention, and I hope you'll be able to come over, and I'm asking the talent to come, I said, are you still involved with that couple? Not at all, he said. No, he said, I can't work with
So they're
them.
pulling a fast one here.
They'd pulled a fast one. And what they'd done is they'd contacted the hotel, asked to speak to, I don't know whether they particularly wanted John and Liz. I suspect they had. That's who they wanted. They thought maybe it would be too dangerous to ask to speak to Tom. So they'd said, look, we do Doctor Who merchandise. We just got a little store. Could you just come by and take a look at it?
Not knowing what he was walking into.
No, because when they got there, when Pertwee and Sladen got there were about another 500 or 600 fans there. They'd got them in because this was quite a cavernous store. You wouldn't believe it, just for a shop that only sells Doctor Who and Virgin Mary merchandise. Unbelievable, but very true. And there they were. And of course, they couldn't get away. And that's why, when it was time for them to go up on the stage, they're not around anywhere. So they eventually found somebody in security who said, oh, they've gone off to this Doctor Who store in town. Well, that's not part of the itinerary. Anyway, said the security guy, they were supposed to be back about 2 hours ago, and they're not. Looks like they've been kidnapped. So, of course, in I walk and said, hello, everybody, right, out. And they piled into the back of Martin Chung, that was the guy who works for Barbara Elder, into his car to await me, whilst I had some words with the people concerned, and told the fans that if they hadn't been able to get into the Hyatt Regency, they should try again. A number of them never did. They were mainly ones who had been turned away because it was full. It was just at total capacity.